husband is bringing me my espresso. You are the best, my love. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Oh, that one's really good. And I'd say that even off camera. Hi guys, hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are discussing spiritual warfare and lust, but basically I'm just going to be talking with you guys about what spiritual warfare looks like when you're trying to defeat a sin, and how Satan can sometimes use our weaknesses against us and things like that. So if you're looking for tips and tricks and just advice on how to fight back against Satan and win this battle of spiritual warfare, then stay tuned for the end of this video where I talk about all those things. But something I've realized, and I think you have probably realized, is that sex is everywhere. It's on our phones, it's in our advertisements. I mean, we do not need to talk about the Sydney Sweeney bathwater situation. It's in our music, it's in TV shows and movies. It's like you cannot escape it. Even in movies that are meant for like 13-year-olds, there is sex outside of marriage, there's grotesque scenes, like there's just and The Summer I Turned Pretty has certainly come out, and for some reason, I don't even understand this TV show necessarily, but the fact that there is a girl who's dating two brothers who she is kind of related to but not really related to in like direct bloodline, but like they're cousins, and you know, it's weird. They're grooming us. I mean, if we look back at Pretty Little Liars and we can view Ezra Fitz as grooming Ariel, what's her name? Then we'll probably look back at The Summer I Turned Pretty for trying to normalize incest in some way. Before we get further into the video though, I would first like to thank our sponsor, House of Joppa. I'll talk more about them later on in the video. Anyways, I digress. We're just gonna get into this because that was not the point of this, and I'm just babbling at this point. The first thing I want to say though is that if you're struggling with this type of addiction, you are not a bad person, okay? There are so many people out there who have been exposed to pornography through no fault of their own, and now they're stuck with the lifelong consequence of having to fight this addiction. And I was one of those people. I didn't go looking for it, it found me, unfortunately, and then I struggled with an addiction for 8 years. So if you are struggling with lust, just don't give up. And I recently did a video about how to beat your lust addiction, which I will link below in the description for you guys, because what we're talking about today kind of piggybacks off of what we've talked about in that video. So feel free to watch that either right now, before watching this video, or after this video, doesn't really matter. In Ephesians 6:12, we're told that our battle is not just against flesh and blood, but also against the powers of darkness, against evil. So I want you to be reminded that we're not just fighting physical battles, we're not just fighting the Karen in the grocery store who won't let us use her 10-month expired coupon. We are also fighting Satan, not calling her Satan, but anyone who's worked in food service or anyone who's worked in retail knows exactly what I'm talking about. But our battle against Satan is very much so a spiritual battle, and we need to be prepared for that. Now, some of you guys might be saying, oh, I don't believe in that mumbo jumbo, heebie-jeebie, voodoo, bada-bada-boo. Like, they just don't want to believe that Satan exists. And that is the greatest lie that Satan has been able to convince people of, is that he does not exist. Because if he doesn't exist, people don't have to watch out for him, and they easily fall for his traps and his snares. And unfortunately, we're looking at the world today and we're seeing that that has worked very, very well. And because I think it's so easy to access graphic content with a click of a button, Satan likes to use that to his advantage. And the lack of self-control in today's world also plays a huge role in how he's able to get a foothold in people's lives. But either way, we need to fight back, and we need to take back control of our lives and our decisions. And fighting back and regaining that does not mean you aren't going to be faced with temptations and you're not going to be tested and you're never going to fall again. But it does mean by fighting back that you are going to become spiritually stronger, and you're going to be able to differentiate what is Satan versus what is you and your habits, and then you'll be able to apply these strategies and get actual results. Father Chad Ripperger says that 95% of men who struggle to remain chaste despite their best efforts also struggle with fear, depression, or despair. Now that's telling me something about men. Men are struggling. And while I'm sure there is a similar statistic out there for women, I have not heard it yet. So if anyone's heard of that, please link it below for me so I can do more research into that, because I'd love to know about that. But men are struggling with fear, depression, and or despair. Could that be because the culture is telling them that their masculinity is toxic, that they aren't needed, that the future is female? Is it because of a lack of fathers in the home showing them what true masculinity and God-fearing masculinity looks like? There are just so many rabbit holes that we could dive down as to why there might be this huge epidemic of men struggling. But at the end of the day, we still need to be able to get help. We are still adults. We still need to grow, and we still need to get better. We can't just stay where we are in our hurt. We have to actually try. And trying sometimes looks like going to a therapist and getting mental help. Now, I've mentioned this before, so I'm going to just talk about it before we get into the spiritual warfare side of things, mainly because I see a lot of people that are willing to just cry demon every single time something bad happens in their life, even though most of the time it's actually their bad decisions and they're just blaming it all on Satan. These people tend to look for Satan under every single rock and every crevice of their life, and they're like, oh, it's because of Satan that this happened, and they're not willing to take actual responsibility and accountability for their actions and their free will choices. So the first thing I would do before crying Satan or crying demon is to see if you have a mental health disorder. This is probably the most important thing, and this is what exorcists will look for first before diagnosing you with demons. So what they do is they put you through a psychological evaluation and they send you to therapy and see if it's maybe a mental health disorder or a psychological disorder, something that's going on with you and isn't necessarily diabolical. That's not saying that Satan can't exacerbate that, but it's not the root cause of what's causing this. So the first thing I would suggest is to get the mental help you need if you know you struggle with mental health disorders. If you've struggled with lust, this is going to help you. I think a lot of people tend to forget that we are both body and soul, and we need to take care of our bodies just like we do with our souls. So that includes our brain. So find a Catholic therapist, I'm linking some of them below, and rule out the mental illness first, or get the help that you need if you know you struggle with a mental illness or addiction or whatever it might be. And of course, there are going to be temptations. Lust is a sin, so you are going to be tempted to commit a sin, whether that's lust or anger or gluttony or whatever it might be. But here are some things that are just normal when it comes to an addiction, as opposed to, oh, this is a demon trying to influence me or something like that. Again, demons can exacerbate this, but they are not the root reason as to why you're struggling with this. Sometimes it's habits forming, etc. So here are some things that are just kind of normal when you're going through the motions with an addiction and you're trying to beat it. I'm gonna scoot back here because it's more comfortable this way. So something that's kind of normal when you're going through breaking up with an addiction or anything like that is when you kind of have like compulsions and like loss of control, where you've had this habit for so long. For me, for example, I had it for 8 years. So it became such an integrated part of my life that not having it felt weird. And there were certain things that were triggers that were just habits where it's like, no matter what I did, if that trigger happened, I would fall again. Like it was just so horrible. But at the same time, I recognize that this is just a habit. Okay, this is something that pops up and I know it's a trigger, and every single time it happens, yeah, it's going to kind of trigger me. That's why it's called a trigger. So I did really have to identify those triggers and make sure that I was either prepared for them if they did come up and they weren't avoidable, or to completely eradicate them from my life if possible. Another thing that ties into this is just consistently thinking about the behavior and wanting to know when the next time is you can do it again, and just constantly replaying things in your mind. Keep in mind that this needs to be a free will thing. This isn't like intrusive thoughts being thrown into your brain. This is actually like you're reminiscing on things and you're actually spending time ruminating on these things. That is also unfortunately normal. It's not something we should be doing, but because again, it's so saturated in our life, it just seems natural to be thinking about it and about the next time we can get a hit. Another thing that's pretty normal is neglecting our responsibilities. We kind of stop caring about what other people think. Our relationships kind of take a deep dive, and yeah, overall it's just, that's not good, but that is pretty normal when you are trying to come back from an addiction, or if you are in an addiction. And then there are also some people who will try to continue an addiction despite bad finances, despite their relationships going down the drain, despite like everything else. The addiction takes priority over this person's life. And it's really sad to see. I mean, you see that with gambling victims all the time. You see that with shopaholics, where they'll literally put themselves in debt just to be able to get a hit of dopamine from ordering something on Amazon, just for that dopamine to wear off in a couple hours. It's just really sad to see, but the same thing happens if you struggle with lust. Another thing that is unfortunately normal is that when you have been struggling with lust for a very long time, is that you will need more extreme content to get the same hit of dopamine that you have been getting in the past. So the content will become more extreme, you're going to become more desensitized to things, and I talked about this in the last video, but there was a study done in the 1980s on some college students, and they found that, I'm not going to go through the whole study again, you guys can just watch that video, but they basically discovered that all their victims viewed rape as a less serious crime. There were so many other things in there that you guys should hear about because I don't think it's talked about enough, but you just have to keep getting more extreme content in order to feel something, and that's very dangerous because eventually it comes off the screen and suddenly pixels can no longer satiate and it kind of bleeds into the real world. It's very scary. And the last thing that's pretty normal is using it as a cope or as an escape. I think there are a lot of people, especially myself included, when I was a teenager, who used it as an escape or to relieve stress or to just in general not have to worry about the world out there. It was very odd, but it was almost comforting in the moment, and then afterwards you realize what you've done and you're just so disgusted with yourself. Those things, all of those things that I mentioned, are very normal when you're in the midst of an addiction. That's not Satan, that's not, you know, demons or whatever trying to coax you into watching darker things. That's a natural human reaction when you need more dopamine and things like that. So yeah, unfortunately we can't blame Satan for any of those things really. But these things that I've mentioned, if you struggle with any of these things, you should be seeing a Catholic therapist. At the end of the day, we have free will, and it's up to us to be able to break the chains and break the habits that we have formed over the years. And now a word from our sponsor, House of Joppa. Guys, I know how difficult it can be to figure out where to shop for all of your Catholic items. But that is why I am so glad that House of Joppa exists, because there you can find any Catholic item that you need for your house or apartment. I cannot tell you guys how many times I have been looking for an item and haven't been able to find it anywhere except for House of Joppa. Whether that's a Marian statue, a beautiful Sacred Heart necklace, or a beautiful crucifix. They have everything you could possibly need, from kitchen supplies, books, to crucifixes, to Marian statues, and just so much more. You guys probably already know by now, but the bronze crucifix is my absolute favorite. I do all of my prayers in front of this crucifix, and you guys have seen it multiple times in my videos, my live streams, and my vlogs. It's just a beautiful reminder of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, and it's a great conversation starter. Not to mention, it's so beautiful. So if you guys are looking for well-made Catholic decor, check out House of Joppa. That's houseofjoppa.com. I've linked them below in the description. You will not be disappointed. Okay, back to the video. Anyways, but if Satan is involved for some reason, whatever reason that might be, it might look a little different. For example, let's say you are a practicing Catholic, okay? You reverted, converted, or you're a cradle Catholic, and you've been living the commandments, you receive the sacraments, you live a good, devout Catholic life. Everything should be absolutely dandy, right? You're doing nothing wrong. Well, if you're going through spiritual warfare, it might feel like a nightmare. You do all the things that you're supposed to do, but you're receiving intrusive, violent, and disturbing thoughts. You're hit with an overwhelming, relentless temptation through these thoughts, and they're absolutely crushing. Or maybe you have moments of clarity and deep remorse, but then seemingly out of nowhere, your judgment seems clouded, you feel your will weakening, more so than just a regular temptation, and it's like you almost black out. I actually had this, and it took a really, really long time to figure out whether or not I had actually committed a mortal sin or not, because it felt like an absolute dream. I did not feel like I was completely in control. My judgment seemed clouded. It was very frightening, and it messed with me a lot. I ended up talking to a priest about it, and he was actually able to help me quite a bit, and I'm going to share with you what he shared with me a little bit later on in the video when I offer my tips and tricks, but he helped me a ton. And I don't know how popular this situation is. When I've talked to people who struggle with lust or pornography addiction, I've never actually heard them say they've struggled with this type of thing, clouded judgment, blacking out type of thing. But I am sure that there are some people out there who do, because, well, there's so many people who struggle with this. So I'm sure there's at least one other person who has also experienced this. But anyways, spiritual warfare might also look like hating holy things. And I'm not saying like, oh, I just don't want to pray today. Like, I don't really feel like it. I'm talking like a big reaction. Something that is just completely uncalled for, overly aggressive, overly angry, for no reason. And then there's another thing. I think this is a little bit more rare, but I have heard of people struggling with this too. You'll hear like an actual voice inside your head that's trying to coax you to sin and things like that. It's a lot rarer. Like I said, you don't hear about that too often. Another pretty common thing that I've heard, at least, is reoccurring lustful dreams. I do think that most people who struggle with lust have these. They're kind of hard to escape from because your subconscious can bring up old images, and Satan can even remind you of old videos, signs, images in order to get you to sin. But something I do want to be clear about here is that Satan does not force us to sin. We choose it of our own free will, even if it is a habit. We have something called concupiscence, and we got it from our original mother and father, Adam and Eve. And unfortunately, it's a result of original sin after the fall. The best way that I can describe concupiscence is that it's a desire or like an inclination towards sin. Satan does not give you concupiscence, but he can exploit it. Demons, as the freaks as they are, understand our weaknesses, and they know how to use our weaknesses against us. There's actually this quote from Father Ripperger that I've been saving until like this video that I am now going to read, and I'm so excited because I've been saving it forever. Ordinary temptation essentially occurs in this way. The demons actually can introduce into our imagination images. Now, they can't create images of things that we've never seen before. They can take parts of those things in our memory and put them together in order to create different images, but they can't make a blind man see color or imagine color. They have to use something that's already there. This is one of the reasons why I tell people never, under any circumstances whatsoever, to ever view any pornography, aside from the fact that some of it's being cursed. So if you needed another reason to stop watching pornography outside of the sex trafficking and exploitation and so on and so forth, now most of it's being cursed. But Father Ripperger reiterates something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and that's that demons can put images in your mind that you've already seen before, and they use intrusive thoughts and memories to slowly break down your will. Demons can also apply the emotion that they want you to feel to an image in your imagination, so they can basically take a lustful image and make it seem more appealing or intense, and it makes us want that more so than we normally would. I personally used to have this really bad. For months I would be completely clean, and then out of nowhere I would get totally bombarded with awful memories or things that I've seen, and those were some of the toughest battles I ever faced while trying to get over that addiction. Satan really loves to make you feel like a failure, so do not give him that satisfaction. Make sure you go to confession right away and pray an act of contrition when you slip up, because when you fall down, you need to get back up again. That's what separates the saints from everybody else. It's interesting though, because Satan wants us to fall, because if we fall, we're in his hands then, and he will do anything possible to get us to fall. But if he tests that on the wrong person, on the person who is in friendship with God, who is really trying to live a holy life, he's actually aiding them in becoming a saint faster than if their life was completely easy peasy lemon squeezy. And there's a few reasons for this. I mean, first of all, you're building spiritual strength, and God wants warriors. So if you signed up to be one of God's warriors, which most of us have, if you are confirmed, we are the church militant. If you get confirmed, you are officially a warrior of God. So if you have confirmation, you're being a witness to him on earth, you're following the commandments, you're living a devout Catholic life, yeah, you're gonna have to face some battles. But these battles are what make us holy. It is what can help us get to heaven. And Satan also hates the fact that that's kind of a thing where it's like, yes, this person could fall and be in my hands, sure, but if they don't, then all of my efforts are actually aiding in them becoming one of the greatest saints. Like, I think that's really funny. Okay guys, before we continue into the video a little bit further, I first want to tell you guys about my Patreon. Over on my Patreon, you guys will get full-length videos, ad-free, censor-free content, on top of other perks like being able to vote on videos like this one. And depending on what tier you choose, we also have a live Zoom call each month. So if you'd like to support what I do here, please consider checking out my Patreon. And if you'd prefer to make a one-time donation as opposed to a continuous one, you can do so on my website at thereligioushippie.com. And if you're unable to donate, please like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you know when I upload a video. Okay, let's get back into it. And it's also really important to remember that in the midst of these battles, God does not leave us. He pours his grace out upon us, and we just need to be receptive of that and stay strong. Because in the darkest moments, you will shine because he will be shining through you. And if you feel like you're being harassed by a demon or you're being overly tempted, if any of these situations kind of fit your situation, the first thing you need to do is go to confession and be in a state of grace. Being in friendship with God through confession, being in a state of grace, that's basically what that means. You do have authority over these demons because of Jesus Christ. And once you are in a state of grace, you can do something called binding prayers. It is so important, though, that you are in a state of grace, means there's no mortal sins on your soul. Otherwise, it could be spiritually dangerous because you are not in friendship with God. And he is the one who ultimately gives us authority of the demons. And there is no gray area, okay? If you are cut off from God in mortal sin, your soul isn't just in limbo. You don't have to join a satanic temple to be in the hands of Satan. You are in the hands of Satan when you commit a mortal sin, and that is scary, okay? That is horrifying. And Satan is not going to tolerate someone who he already has a grasp on trying to have authority over him. That's not how it works. So be in a state of grace. Now, I've linked the binding prayer below, but I will give an example so that you guys know how to use it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and simple, but some people still get confused, so I'm just gonna explain that to you guys really quick and give you guys an example. Let's say that you struggle with lust, pornography, anger, despair, whatever it might be, okay? Say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I bind all spirits of lust, anger, whatever you're struggling with, etc. And I immediately cast you to the foot of the cross to be judged by Jesus. Never return again. Now, if you finally feel peace and you feel relaxed and things like that, then that's a pretty good sign that it was probably spiritual warfare. And you should definitely keep the binding prayer in your back pocket in case you guys need it. And I've mentioned it a million times at this point, but you know what? I will mention it a million times again. Go to confession, be in a state of grace. Okay, guys, that is the number one thing you have to do if you want to fight back against Satan and any of the warfare that he invokes on you. I think there are a lot of people who are afraid of confession, but in reality, it's like you need to go to confession. Tell the priest you're struggling with an addiction to lust, and specifically what kind of lust. Are you going to strip clubs? Are you watching pornography? Are you masturbating, or are you lusting after somebody? If you can, tell the priest how many times you've committed that sin since your last confession. And if you can't remember, just give a general, I've been struggling with this almost daily for a month or something like that. The priest will know what to do. He isn't there to judge you. He isn't there to condemn you. And I think a lot of times people think that there's a lightning bolt that's going to hit them in the confessional because of how angry God is at them for the sins they've committed. But that's not true. Confession is a gift from God. And I think the reason people have this idea that God is a very angry and, domineering type God is because their parents were like that. They were never shown mercy or understanding or love when they were in the midst of a struggle or when they did something wrong. They were usually hit with ridicule, if not hit physically. So they never really saw what it meant to have a merciful, loving, God-fearing father. And it's really sad when you think about that. So I do understand the fear, but you do need to rewire your brain because God gave us confession so we could come back to him and be in a state of grace again. It's a gift of mercy and forgiveness from our loving Father, and we still need to do penance and make up for the damage we've caused, but he wants us back. He wants you back. And after going to confession, do your penance and receive Jesus truly present in the Eucharist. Always do this in a state of grace, of course. If you do have any mortal sins on your soul, make sure you go to confession before receiving Jesus in the Eucharist, as if you do not, that is sacrilege and that does need to be confessed. But the Eucharist is food for our souls. It nurtures us. And the longer we're away from Jesus and we're away from the spiritual food, the weaker our souls get, the more starved our souls get. So I highly suggest daily mass. This is just really good for you if you struggle with lust or any mortal sin, really. You guys know what else is good for you? Praying the rosary. If you don't already pray it, and I mean actually pray it, I don't mean mumbling over the words in your car or, kind of thinking about it while you're on your daily walk or anything like that. Actually sitting down and spending intentional time with Jesus, with Mary, meditating on the mysteries of the rosary. Now, I don't want to tell you guys that praying your rosary in the car is a bad thing. Okay, it's not. It's not bad. I think it's actually really, really good, especially if that's the only time you're able to fit in your rosary on a certain day, but that should not become the norm. You shouldn't normally be praying your rosary in your car on the way to work, unless you're praying an extra rosary. We should be a lot more intentional with our prayer time, deepening that relationship with God, meditating on Jesus's life. That is so, so important. So, is praying your rosary in the car wrong? No, it's not wrong, but you also need to do it intentionally and meditate on it, because that is the way the rosary was meant to be prayed. So keep praying it in the car on road trips or whatever, but also make sure you're making time to actually sit down and intentionally meditate on the mysteries. Our Lady is a wonderful person to ask to help purify your heart and to purify your mind, to lead you closer to her son, Jesus. And another saint who's really helpful during spiritual warfare is Saint Michael. He literally yeeted Satan out of heaven, so he can yeet Satan out of your life too. And actually, there are a lot of people who have told me that they struggle focusing during prayer and they feel like it's diabolical because they do everything possible. They're not an iPad kid, whatever, and they still cannot focus during Mass. And so I tell them to invoke Saint Michael and ask Saint Michael to wrap his wings around their mind to keep them from distraction, and it works like a charm. It's crazy. And there are some people out there who are genuinely just overstimulated and they need to get that under control, like TV going on their phone while also their computer's playing something or whatever, or they're watching a movie but also scrolling on social media on Reels. Like, people are so overstimulated these days, it's no surprise to me that they can't sit in silence for 5 minutes. So you know what? Pray the prayer, and if it works, then it was spiritual warfare. And if it doesn't work, then I hate to break it to you, but you are an iPad kid. Might want to get that looked at. Another tip when dealing with spiritual warfare, Father Dan Rehill, who I actually unfortunately did not get to meet, but I did briefly see him at an event that we were both participating in. I think he actually did an exorcism at the event because we were having like tons and tons of problems, dude. It was crazy. I'm not going to get into it, mainly because I don't think I'm allowed to, but just take my word for it. It was some crazy mumbo jumbo going on. But Father Rehill, he suggests learning the Beatitudes and living the Beatitudes out in your everyday life. He actually says that it's harder to live out the Beatitudes than it is to live out the commandments, because in the commandments, it just tells you, do this, don't do that, etc., etc., etc. But with the Beatitudes, it's an actual way of life. So he suggests that you pick one Beatitude every week and you just work on that Beatitude. How can I cultivate this in my life? How can I practice this? How do I go about that? And you can find the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. You guys have heard me talk about the Beatitudes before because they have helped me tremendously in my faith journey. And over time, as you practice the Beatitudes, your perspective starts to shift about yourself, about those around you, about the world, because you're starting to view the world through the lens of Christ, because he says that's what the Beatitudes are. It is viewing the world through Christ's eyes. So I highly suggest you guys try to do that. And if you are doing that, you guys are probably going to find yourself feeling mortified. Not mortified as in like, oh, but like mortified as in you're mortifying your flesh kind of thing. Jesus said that some demons can only be cast out through prayer and fasting. Those are Jesus's words, okay? Not mine. He said it. If we want to control our fleshly desires and any type of habits that we have to start denying ourselves. Tell yourself no, even with things that are completely harmless, like your morning coffee or your Sunday donut or your little sweet treat after dinner. These things are not inherently evil. They're not even bad. Unless, of course, you have a health condition and you have diabetes or something and you're like overeating or whatever. I don't know. That's not the point though. Denying yourself is important, because when you deny the small things, you will be able to deny the bigger things when they come up. You don't just go to the gym and become buff overnight. You don't just get a washboard ab overnight. Washboard ab? Is that what people say? That's so weird. You actually have to put in the time, the dedication, the effort, and it's hard, but there are results afterwards. And the same thing goes for mortifying your flesh. The more you do it, the stronger you'll become, and that is what we want. But I think it's also really important to remember that true strength does come from God, and we can't solely rely on ourselves, because at the end of the day, we are still weak creatures and we still have concupiscence and we still need God. So while you're denying yourself things, offer them up to God or for a family member or the holy souls in purgatory or whoever is in need that you're aware of. And I just realized that I never prefaced saying which one was the most important thing that a priest helped me with, and that was the binding prayers, to be to be clear. That is the most important thing. That is the most helpful thing. Confession and binding prayers have helped me so much with spiritual warfare, not just in lust, but in literally everything else. Rooting out pride, rooting out gluttony, rooting out scrupulosity. No matter what it is, those two things together have always helped. And then you just sprinkle a little bit of sprinkles on top with the rosary and everything else, and you're good to go. All right, that's all I have for you guys in today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye. I would like to thank my patrons over on Patreon for making this video happen. You guys are the reason I'm able to continue this ministry and everything I do. So I would love to thank Jude Crew Plus. And I would personally like to thank Roger Davis, Rubes Good Brain Coffee, Darren, Jay Usetti, Veronica Beck, Dan Nuns, Sabrina, James Bell, Father Carr, George Gregory, Winona Dubrova, Oliver Waite, Andrew Plowski, Alex R., James, Geraldi Guzman, Michael, Paul Donovan, Christopher Woodside, Michael Martin, Kevin Ashbrook, and Jason. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your support. You're the reason I'm able to continue this work, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.